The fiery explosion seen and heard for miles. It was bound for the International Space Station with supplies for the astronauts there. Plus, that guy who disappeared from a Denver Broncos football game, you remember this? Well, he's actually safe and sound, which is good news, but police say they don't have any information about why he took off from the game. And milk does a body good, so they say, but a body could get too much of a good thing, according to one study. The new research claims that milk can be harmful to your health. We'll talk about it.
The state of Michigan is now ordering a Detroit man to pay thousands in back child support or face prison time. The problem? His ex-girlfriend and a DNA test prove that he is not the father. Here's how this case has played out over the course of nearly 30 years. According to court records, back in 1987, Carnell Alexander's girlfriend put his name down as the father of her child when she applied for state assistance. In the late 1980s, the state sent a process server to Alexander's father's house. The server told the court he delivered the notice to Alexander. Turns out he lied. Alexander was in prison at the time for an unrelated crime. In 1991, during a traffic stop, the cop pulled up his record, saw that he owed $60,000 in back child support, and arrested him. This year, the judge erased part of the debt Alexander owed to the mother of the child, actually all of the debt that he owed the mother of the child, but not the $30,000 owed to the state for welfare benefits over the years for this kid that isn't his. Let's bring in our legal panel. Diana Eisman is a criminal defense attorney. Dan Schorr is a former prosecutor. Diana, how does something like this happen?
Flaws in the legal system. I mean, this man's constitutional rights were clearly violated here. He was not awarded due process rights. He was not allowed to be heard on the issue of the fact that this isn't even his kid. He has proof, actual DNA evidence, that this is not his child. And I think that it's overwhelming how absurd this is, in that he is still being ordered to pay the $30,000 in child support for a default judgment that he was never properly served on. This is a complete and blatant violation of his constitutional rights. There's no question about it.
He says, Dan, that he feels like he's standing in front of a brick wall with nowhere to go, and I can understand the feeling. Even his ex-girlfriend admits that he is not the father of the child that, she once claimed he had fathered. But the state is saying, we don't care, we want our money.
Right, and it's really important that this is not seen as a child support legal issue. This is an issue about a court order and then service of process. In order to have a court order served against you, you have to be able to be aware that there's this court order, so you have the chance to fight it, to contest it. And here, the process server almost 30 years ago said that he served Mr. Alexander with the court order, and then he failed to contest that court order. But Mr. Alexander was incarcerated at the time, so we know he really wasn't served with that court order. The process server said Mr. Alexander refused to sign acknowledgement, but we know that he wasn't there.
Yeah, so the process server lied.
He was either lying or he was completely wrong. And either way, the process server is the reason why we have this problem today. However, because almost 30 years have gone by, the statute of limitations would prevent any legal action against the process server. But still, this has to be looked into, and there's a major injustice being carried out against Mr. Alexander.
Why isn't there a judge, Diana, with good sense who says, look, clearly, this is a screw up by the state. Our process server, didn't get you the paperwork. I'm going to sign off on releasing you from this $30,000 obligation. So far, the judges are still leaning on this guy.
Right. I think that's what is getting everybody confused and why everyone's kind of scratching their head about this case. This is very clear. If this were a murder case or any other kind of criminal case and there was DNA evidence to support the innocence of this man, he would be exonerated and all penalties would be discharged. But for some reason, the judges in this case are not willing to let go of this $30,000 debt to the state. And it's totally unclear and completely unconstitutional and an invalid order.
There's no real intent for him to, try to defraud the state here, Dan, right? I mean, He was in prison. He didn't even know that he was supposedly the father of this kid, which he is not.
And this case is not over. State law is on the side of Mr. Alexander, which says that a default judgment, which is a judgment entered when you're not contesting it, which is what happened here, a default judgment can be set aside for good cause if there's a reasonable explanation or a gross injustice will be carried out. So this can still be contested and challenged. Mr. Alexander is challenging it, and I presume that sooner or later, our court will set this aside because it's not right to have him liable for this judgment when he was never served.
It's not right, but Diana, I mean, you know, think about the time and the expense. When you do battle with the state, you know, and you're a person of relatively modest means, that's tough to do.
It's really difficult to learn how to navigate the process just as a layperson in general. And then when you add in the fact that he is a man of limited means, it's going to be really hard for him to go up against the government and win in this case. Even though the law may be on his side, there are procedural problems, obviously, with the way that this is being imposed on him. Yeah. And so it's very clear that this guy is being treated unfairly, and hopefully the state will reverse the ruling, the court will reverse the ruling and exonerate this man's judgment.
Well, it's really clear to us that he's being treated unfairly, but the judges are persisting in trying to collect this $30,000. Unbelievable to me, since he's got proof that he wasn't the father, he never fathered the child, and he never got the process, never got the papers served because he was in jail at the time, but the state persists. We will let our viewers know what happens. Diana Eisman and Dan Schorr, thank you both.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, if you've ever heard the saying, milk does a body good,
yep,
you might be surprised to hear the results of a new study. We're going to have the details. There's also this.